Nigeria may be facing additional revenue challenges and a gas shortage as the Nigeria Liquefied Natural Gas has declared force majeure on its 22 million tons per annum processing plant. This is due to widespread flooding that has disrupted gas supply to the company. The high floodwaters have led to a shut-in of gas production, reducing supplies to the company and forcing it to declare a force majeure. Now, force majeure absolves companies from liabilities of contractual obligations due to factors outside their control. This development could unfortunately worsen Nigeria's cash crunch situation and curtail global gas supply as Europe and other countries struggle to replace Russian exports due to the invasion of Ukraine. Joining me from River State, Nigeria is Dr. Austin Ukwu. Dr. Austin Ukwu, welcome to Business Edge again. Thank you for joining me.
Good morning and thank you.
So we hear that the LNG, Nigeria LNG now has declared force majeure as a result of the flooding, which is, of course, an event outside of the company's control. Do we have an idea of the extent right now of the devastation that the flooding has caused?
No, I do not really have the first-hand information about the extent of damage the flood has caused. But one thing is sure is that it has really caused a lot of economic hardship in the country. And so that would definitely impact the amount of gas being exported from this country as time goes on.
All right, so let's look at the internal implications. One of the biggest things might possibly be for Nigerians a rise in the gas prices right now. So what do Nigerians need to brace for when it comes to gas? Do you anticipate a scarcity of the commodity as long as the force majeure is active? What will the impact of the force majeure be on the everyday Nigerian?
Really, because the LNG is meant to be exported, is methane that is cooled to 160 degrees Fahrenheit, reduce the volume to about 610 times the initial size in gaseous form. So, and this gas is actually exported. Basically, I've not seen LNG utilizing gas locally. I've not seen that. Because the local one we use is LPG, which is the propane or a tape component of the gas that is being liquefied. And so LNG currently has about 2 million tons per annum of LNG, liquefied natural gas. They have about 5 million metric tons of natural gas liquid. Natural gas liquid simply means the gas C2 plus. You know, when you have the natural gas, which is C1, C2 onwards. So the C2 plus, which is the heavier component outside C1, are being separated because LNG is purely C1, that is the methane component. So which is now cooled to 160 degrees Fahrenheit. Now the other component, which is C2 plus, 5 metric tons, LNG currently has about 5 metric tons of it. All of them derive from about 3.5 billion standard cubic feet per day of natural gas intake. So what I'm seeing from here is that locally, it may not have effect because currently our local use, which is the industrial use, which is the power plants. I've not heard the gas and electric company say that they've suspended the operation or something. I've not heard that. So it's coming from LNG. And actually, it is the company themselves that actually invoked force majeure, not LNG. So the companies are the ones saying, the upstream company are the ones saying, we cannot deliver gas to you because of certain events that occur. So the point that I'm making sense is that this challenge may actually be for export, mainly for export. It may have little or no impact in our local consumption. That is what I'm guessing.
Okay. So that makes sense. So there are those who are supplying, the local suppliers for LNG are the ones who have declared force majeure, which has led also to the force majeure that the LNG itself has now had to declare. So this force majeure comes on the heels of growing shortfalls in Nigeria's crude oil production. And we've seen that the country's revenue has significantly dropped in the past few years, which means that Africa's largest economy is depending more and more on borrowing to fund its budget. But it's also important to add that the NLNG was already falling short of its production capacity due to difficulties securing adequate feedstock. Now, before the force majeure was declared, what other issues led to the company also losing? It declared about a $7 billion loss this year already. So what else has been affecting the NLNG before this force majeure situation, the flooding, came into effect?
Of course, there are many factors that influence business in this country. One of them is the current pipeline vandalism that is occurring in the country, all around the country. Two could be the business environment. Again, most of the gas the gas we feed to LNG could be the associated gas and non-associated gas. So the associated gas component, which is the gas you produce with oil, those ones are inherently produced with oil, whether you like it or not. Those gas come with oil. That was like associated gas. So, and some of them are non-associated. The gas, you drill those gas mainly because you want to sell it to a field, you want to sell it before you can produce such gas. So now, most of the associated gas we have are found offshore. That's stranded gas. So there may not be a way to actually send those gas all the way from the offshore down to the pipeline where they can be sent to LNG fields. So there are many factors that could accumulate into this effect that could make the shortage of gas feed to LNG. There are many factors, starting from the advantage of pipelines to economic environment to stranded gas at offshore. So many factors will play into the role to cause that before now.
So, Austin, when we combine the force majeure and then the consequences of the oil theft and the pipeline vandalism, we can see that the NLNG is no longer operating at its nameplate capacity of 22 million tons per annum due to gas shortages. We had President Buhari very recently give us his last budget under his administration, and we saw a budget deficit of about 10 point something in the budget there. What are the wider implications? Because we know that there's been a lot of reliance on the money coming in through oil and gas exports. In terms of the wider economic impact of this, what are we looking at?
Truly, we are bleeding everywhere in this country. We are bleeding everywhere because the revenue we derive from crude oil is there is shortfall in crude revenue everywhere, from crude oil to gas. And so this LNG problem now has accumulated problem that we will suffer in the long term, because the amount of revenue that will accrue to the federation account will be far, far less than what expected. Because usually what happens in this case is that the company will actually tomorrow reconcile their differences, and then what we call the makeup clause, the makeup gas. So tomorrow the company will actually find a way to make up this gas. But nobody knows when, because before you make up the gas that falls short this period of time, the take or pay gas must be accounted for first, because normally, I'm speaking generally on based on gas contracting now, not because I have any particular knowledge on it. What happens is that at the end of this force majeure, the company will note how much shortfall they have, how much what they call the makeup gas they have, because makeup gas are actually gas, take-up gas are actually not taking, take or pay gas are actually not taking. So in that sense, when this thing is done, the companies and LNG will come down and find out how much makeup gas is left. So in subsequent time, next year or any time at all, when the take or pay gas have been taken, then the makeup gas will come in. So the truth is that this is like a deferment, a suspension of obligations on the parties. It is not a total cancellation of obligation of the parties. That's what I want you to understand.
Okay.
The parties did not actually cancel the obligation. So the obligations like suspended. So in future, there's a chance that that same gas that was not supplied today due to this flood could be supplied tomorrow. So that revenue could also accrue to LNG, because LNG as an investor has to have, because the take or pay clause gives the LNG a kind of a risk allocation to ensure that they are sure the stream of revenue they're going to get tomorrow. So they are sure that tomorrow we're going to get this money from this stream of revenue. And so it gives the suppliers the edge that, oh, we need to supply this quantity of gas to LNG, whether at come rain constant. So though the force majeure has suspended the obligations for now, it does not actually cancel or terminate the obligation. That's the point. So there's a chance tomorrow that we could also recover such a revenue in time, but it may not be as soon as required, necessary. So it may be in future.
So, Austin, that's a very important point you make there, because right now we know that the NLNG has, as you said, contractual obligations to several parties. Now, we've heard from Portugal's Galp Energia, which says it may face additional sourcing disruptions from the force majeure and is already looking for alternative LNG sources. Now, it might surprise many people to know that the Nigeria Liquefied Natural Gas Company accounts for nearly 4% of the global supply. So when we look at the international consequences of this, even though it's a deferment, these contracts will still likely be filled in the future. As it stands right now, what are the international consequences of the force majeure in the NLNG?
As I said, the consequence is either suspension, deferment, but I can't say in specific terms. I do not envisage any contract to have a termination due to force majeure, because a contract could also, it's a possibility, but I can't see that happening, that a contract will say, if there's a force majeure, by that event, the contract is terminated. Except in some cases where the force majeure persists over time and the contracting parties are unable to hold on to that contract again. Because, okay, on that ground, we could terminate. So the point of it is that I do not see the force majeure resulting to termination. Rather, the consequence is a deferment of obligation. So that's what I see as a consequence. And by and large, the contracting parties will always find a way to resolve their disputes, because the contract as I said, will provide for dispute resolution, how to settle such things. And I believe, in essence, that the contract might have been drafted in such a way that the take or pay clause provision might have been carefully drafted not to make it unenforceable in law. So that being said, at the end of it, the entire obligation is deferred. It somehow, sometime tomorrow, will be fulfilled. That's what I believe. The consequence is a deferment, not that of cancellation or termination of a contract.
Okay. All right. So let's also look at something else that's happening. Unfortunately, it's not just disruption in Nigeria that's happening. Unplanned disruptions in the United States, Nigeria, and Australia have forced traders to pay millions in inflated costs for alternative supplies. And it's estimated that replacing each lost NLNG cargo on the spot market would actually generate around 100 million euros of pre-tax losses for Portugal's oil and gas company, Galp Energia. And they typically receive about 2 to 3 cargoes per month from Nigeria. When you look at the wider sort of conversation happening in context of the Russia-Ukraine crisis, having Europe, the European Union, look to Nigeria and other sources for LNG as an alternative to Russian gas, does this, in your estimation, sort of push back how far Nigeria can go, how much progress Nigeria can go as being seen as an alternative source for Europe? If Portugal has to go to other places pending, we don't know how long this is going to last. While you say contracts may not be cancelled, it could push back Nigeria's plan to really be a bigger player in the gas markets internationally. What do you think?
What I think is that all the stakeholders should play important role now to meet the effect of this, that will resume the export of LNG as soon as possible. And I think if all the stakeholders could mindfully do that, they will achieve the aim. Because as it is, the war in Russia has made Europe dependent on other sources of gas to heat their homes. So now Nigeria should now play an important role in trying to fill that gap. And I do not see, with all these myriad of problems we have in this country, Nigeria coming up to fill that role. It is difficult. So my advice is that all stakeholders should put hands on deck now, or should go on deck to ensure that we will mitigate the effect of this flood and resume export of LNG as soon as possible. Because our economy, the survival of this country actually depends on the oil and gas industry. And so we do not need to play with it at all. And with that being said, your first question of the impact of this flood, I do not have the empirical evidence of the impact of this flood on the Nigerian economy. But what I know, in essence, is that if from the flood I've seen, it is not as bad as hurricanes or that thing that people in 2 days will come together. Like what happened in Florida of recent. After the hurricane, in few days, electricity was restored, everything happened. Here, this flood is not as bad as technology cannot handle us moving gas to and fro this country. So we should come together, put our hands together, and make sure that this gas is being transported LNG onward for export.
Okay.
That's my opinion.
Okay. So we are hearing that some cargo has been loaded, so it's not a complete shutdown for the NLNG. And the company says it's working to mitigate the impact of the flood. What is it doing, or what can it really do? Because even as we know right now, the floodwaters are still rising in some parts of the country. Some 27, 28 states out of 36 states in Nigeria have been affected by this flooding, including Bayelsa, Delta State, Rivers, where you're currently at as well. So what can the NLNG do to mitigate the impact of the flooding?
Okay, first of all, most of the LNG pipelines are through Delta rivers to Boni. That is most of the pipeline. And the flood is mostly in those areas. But the point I am saying, and I could not make any sense, is this. With the current technology we have, with the current situation of technology in what we do, there's a way these events will be mitigated and production resumed as soon as possible to the optimal level, and not giving excuses. If and only if the stakeholders should be able to come together and think this through. So I cannot offer direct advice to them because I do not know exactly the situation of their pipelines and the situation of the flood at the region of where the pipeline is actually located. But I do not think that flooding is actually something that will make pipeline not to function at all point in time, because the process is simple. Once this gas is being, once the E&P companies produce this gas, they have to put it into a processing plant, which now remove this, remove the C1 and C2 plus and head. They remove the gaseous hydrogen sulfide, nitrogen, CO2, and the rest. So this thing moves through pipelines to LNG for liquefaction and then onward for export. So the point I'm making is that this flooding, as much as I sympathize with the Nigerians for this flood, shouldn't be that kind of event that could, if you ask me, declaring force majeure here should be something that will not last as long as possible. It should not last full time. So within some time, Nigerians should be able to come together and forge ahead and then solve their problem, because it's possible. It's possible.
All right. It's possible. We'll leave it at that, Dr. Austin Ukwu. Thank you so much for joining me. It is possible to see how things will play out, and we'll be watching very closely. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. And right now, it's very difficult to have a timeline. What we do know from officials is that the flooding, which has become a consequence of unusually heavy rains, as well as the release of water from a dam in Cameroon, could continue into November. As of right now, the force majeure declared by the NLNG partners is one that is leading to its own shutdown as well, its inability to fulfill some contractual obligations. But those contracts may not absolutely be taken apart. They may just be deferred. But with floods continuing, rising waters in some parts of the country, we don't know just how long this will impact the economy. You're watching Business Edge. When we come back, there's more. Stick around.